Payment Pulse, a podcast by Clearent by Xplor, a leading full-service payments provider. Welcome to Payment Pulse, a podcast by Clearent by Xplor, where our goal is to humanize and simplify the complex world of payments. My name is Steve, and today we have a very, very special episode. For those of you watching on YouTube, you might already notice a little bit of a difference here in the panel that we have, but it brings me great pleasure to introduce our first guest on this podcast. And don't worry, Max isn't going anywhere, but we're facilitating these conversations with guests a little bit differently. But again, that said, excited to introduce our first guest here. I'm here with payments veteran Mark Passifione, the Senior Vice President of Integrated Payments Business Development here at Clearent. Mark is here with us today to crack the code on the difference between embedded and integrated payment solutions at a pretty high level, just to be transparent there. But we're going to be talking about that and really why the choice between the two can make or break your payment strategy. Mark has been in payments for the last 26 years, including the rollout of both integrated and embedded payment strategies for software providers. He's also personally been very influential to me. I've worked with him for years now, a little bit at a previous competitor of Clearent as well, which he'll get into. But very excited to bring him on and really allow him to share some of those experiences that he's had over the last 26 years. But Mark, how are you doing today? Just kind of quick banter here back and forth. How are you?
I'm doing great, Steve. I'm excited to be on your podcast. Beautiful day in California. It's going to be in the high 80s. I know I tell you to come out here all the time. You can live where you want to live. Allergies are in full effect, though. The winds are popping up, and so it's a typical California spring day, but it's beautiful. Getting ready for Mother's Day, so excited to be on the show.
Nice. Yeah, glad to have you. Mark's been pushing me towards California for a while, and I've been thinking about it. So we'll see what happens here next. That said, let's jump into it a little bit here. Mark, during your tenured experience, you've built successful payment solutions and partnerships within the independent sales organization channel, as well as enterprise, and now embedded and integrated solutions for software providers. Can you briefly take us through your career journey and really what led you to where you are today and focusing on integrated and embedded solutions?
Sure. Steve, I've had like a kind of a crazy full circle journey. It's odd. I think about this a lot because the way I made my way into payments, I was actually the CEO of a software company, and we were selling into large wireless carriers. So at the time, there was a big consolidation going on in the wireless market with companies like AT&T and Verizon. And then what was then McCaw Cellular, now AT&T Wireless, they had come to me and they were looking for a solution to help them with their payments. And they wanted to move from a system where they were just fronting inventory out to their distribution channel to, hey, we can make them pay with a credit card. That would be a good idea for us. So you got to remember, this is 1999. AT&T did not have a big retail presence at that point. It was all through third-party channel. The internet was around, but it wasn't used anywhere near like it's used today. And so my partner and I started looking around for companies that had payment pieces, and we found a company that we bought, and we took that software and continued to kind of customize it over time and commercialize it in ways by adding database to it and front-end UI. Eventually, that product became known as Supercharge, and the idea was it could turn any workstation on any local area network into a payment terminal. So it was a big avoidance for people. It made it easy for people who were working in those days in local area networks to then have all of their call center people or all of their people in their organization who had a workstation the ability to, accept a credit card payment, right? So we continued with that company for a while, where we started distributing that product through ISOs, and later we eventually started buying ISOs because we found out that was a pretty lucrative business at the time, and so we started taking on more and more of the revenue channel. It's kind of like the way that PE is pushing software companies today into payments. It was obvious to us that not just to provide the technology that linked them to the payments, but to start buying and making money on the payments. So we started doing that. It went really well. I eventually sold that company, and it's still in existence today. It's still out there running today, and it's still focused on selling payments to third-party software partners that need integration to payments. I went on to other places like Car Connect, where I was fortunate to meet yourself and really start a working relationship with you, and then eventually here at Xplor Pay, Clearent. So really, for me, I've never really moved far from the intersection of software and payments. It's how I got to the payments business, and it's probably how I'll probably leave it, I'm guessing, at some point.
Yeah, really cool full circle breakdown there. I didn't actually realize that when you had first started, it was with the software connection. So, nonetheless, everybody listening, that's why we brought him on. He's been doing this for a while. He's been involved with the software piece since the early days, as he mentioned. So, again, really excited to kind of dive in here and break down this embedded versus integrated definitions here now. So, with that said, let's jump right into into the terms and break them down at a high level. But Mark, could you kind of explain what integrated payments are and what it means?
Sure, I can. The For me, it's a difficult terminology. So we hear integrated versus embedded used almost interchangeably, and I don't think of them that way. But let me take a crack at the way I kind of look at them and how I define them. So I think of an integrated payments as being more of a connection to a third party processor, right? And so characteristically, you'd see something like the payments are going to be processed through some external provider. The person who's using the software, the user, is often redirected or interacts with some sort of third party UI. And I think the easiest way to think about it would be like in an e-commerce platform, right? Where you have a buy button or you have a shopping cart mechanism that you get directed to that allows you to take a payment, right? And if you think about that, you know, that's really what I think of as integrated payments. Right?
Gotcha.
If I was to compare that like to embedded payments, um, I think of embedded payments being more natively built payments into a payments core experience. In other words, the payments built right into the core. It seems seamless, often invisible to the end user. A really good example, I mean, probably one of the best examples, almost invisible payments would be something like Uber, right? Where you put your card on file, you're transacting all the time, and you're not even thinking about the payments, right? It's so far removed from the actual action and the workflow that it just becomes completely embedded in the experience, right? It's just you're the experience to you is getting in a car and jumping in a car, and maybe because you have to fill an expense report, you get an Uber receipt a month later. So that if I was looking at that characteristically, it's that the payments feel like a native part of the software platform themselves, right? That's a good way to characterize it. In today's world, it's often powered by what we term as a PayFac as a service or managed PayFac. And these systems not only enable you to accept payments, they enable you to onboard merchants, manage payouts, control user experience from end to end. And so that's how I really kind of put them in buckets, if you will. That's the easiest way for me to think about it.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And it really seems like the user experience, like the end user experience, is where a lot of the differences and where I think software providers might want to put their focus on in terms of if it's worth the lift or not. We'll get a little bit more into that here in a second, but you highlighted a lot of like the embedded payments user experience, but maybe you can go into a little bit more depth on the integrated and how each are different, but how they're impacting that end user experience, whether it's integrated or embedded.
Yeah, sure. I think each method it kind of engages various functions associated with boarding new payment customers, acceptance payments, and improving the SaaS platform's revenue channel. Right? They all have those components to them to some degree, right? That whether it's integrated or embedded, they're both trying to solve for those functions. The primary difference I see is that the embedded payments option allows the SaaS platform to really control uh, and change what appears to be a disconnected task into a smooth, integrated part of the product experience, right? Instead of it being kind of these separate functions that are connected, it's very seamless, it's very fluid, and I think that's probably the best way to think about it. It's for me, I often look for analogies to try to kind of put things in buckets and kind of build visions that people can see. And so one of the things that I compare it to, the way I'd like to think about it is in the terms of reporting, right? So we work with a company here that's in the field service system. They sell a system, work order system that say an HVAC company or a plumber might use in field to go support somebody. Well, think about a manager in that organization who wants to analyze how many jobs were completed last month, how the technicians perform, what was the average invoice amounts, and let's say the field service platform lets them export files or use a plugin to push data into Power BI or Excel, right? So it's possible, it's external, it requires some setup, right? Maybe an extra tool like a plugin and some time. So you can get the data, but it's a little bit hands-on, a little bit disjointed, right? I would call that integrated, right? That's the concept of integrated. Now take that same field service company and that might have built-in reporting dashboards. The manager logs in, they instantly see the charts, they see the metrics about the technicians, they see the job completion times, they see the amount of work orders and the invoice amounts that happen, and all of that happens inside the platform, right? The reports are interactive and they're tailored to the field service business themselves, right? You don't have to do an export. You don't have to have a plugin. I don't have to go to a marketplace and get other things. So it's fast, it's actionable, and it's just part of the daily workflow, right? To me, that's embedded. Right? That's an easy way to think about it. I think reporting kind of shows that to us in a really good way. Like, when I was selling software years ago, that a lot of what we talked about often was, we can, you can do a lot of work outside of the system in Excel spreadsheets. Finance people are, noted for this all the time, right? They want to work in the Excel spreadsheets, and a lot more of the systems today are starting to embed those reporting in the actual portals and the dashboards. And to me, that's the real value of embedded, right? Is that someone doesn't have to use all of those extra plugins or different things. And when I think of payments, it's the same thing. It's like as much of it as you can get embedded into the SaaS platform, it's going to be just that faster, actual better workflow, better daily workflow. And that's really the experience that I think SaaS companies want to create.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
No, it's really appreciate the analogies and the examples. I think that really helps paint the picture. And I know software providers and even us, right? Like the goal is to create that seamless UX. That said, what's the upsides for one, and then what are the hurdles that software providers, might expect along that journey?
so let me, okay, that's a good question. Let me start with like the embedded side of the business, right? So, in my opinion, embedded payments improve the customer experience by, making payments fast, right? Seamless. And I think it's the thing we talked about a little bit with that workflow. You could call that contextual relevance, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of names for it, but it's this idea where the workflow just improves drastically, right? So I'm going to use the term frictionless workflow. I think that's one of the biggest advantages that embedded payments can do. It can create these things like the Uber example that I mentioned earlier, where you don't even feel it, you don't sense it, you don't see it. It just happens. It's just part of the action. Um, because of the way that the APIs are built and these payback as a service, the no code, low code examples, you get a faster transaction typically, right? Not only is the workflow better, so faster, the transaction itself happens faster. Getting to that point of developing the transaction is quicker and easier. One of the big things that people really love about it is the consistent brand experience, right? I mean, it's the idea of it looks like you stay in the software company's brand at all times, whether it's boarding the customer, whether it's taking a payment, whether it's doing reconciliation against the accounting. You're staying in that brand and you're really learning from that brand. And like anybody who's been in business a long time, in the software business and or the payments business, the idea is to get people in your portals, keep them in your portals, because then you can sell them other stuff. And you can see it's coming. It's the embedded everything environment, right? It's on its way. So and then I think people like the benefit to the SaaS user is this convenient, having all the features in one place. It's a really convenient thing, right? To be able to go into one software application and be able to essentially do all the things that I want to be able to do from one place is a very valuable tool. And then the other side of that is, I think the reason it's not just convenience to the actual user of the SaaS platform, but there's this concept of transparency and control, right? That you have when when I can completely control the experience that the user has. It's pretty positive things. So those are really the things I think that differentiate embedded, but that doesn't mean it's all perfect, right? I mean, I think one of the things with embedded payments that typically happens is there is a lot to do, right? If you want to control the boarding experience, the customer maintenance, dispute management, support ticketing, the more that you grow that side of the business into, things like embedded lending and embedded marketing, all stuff that like our company supports today. It's a lot of integration efforts. It can't be done, even though the tools are better and better all the time. Like, most of the providers in the PayFac as a service space are continually, building better low code, no code solutions. They're improving APIs, better documentation, but it's still a lot more work than just setting up a transactional API and letting a partner handle all of that other part of the business. So I think that's kind of the positive and the negative of embedded, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of the way I look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely the pinnacle of where software providers should want to be, but it does require, heavy resource lifts and it's going to take time to implement. That said, Mark, can you provide the contrast to that and, some brief insight into the integrated payment side and where it makes sense for, especially a smaller team?
Sure. I think the way that we think about software companies, or I think about them, and I think our team here does, is when we're looking at SaaS companies, the software companies go through various stages of growth. That you get some startup, you have companies in growth mode where they might be bringing on PE money because they're making money and they want to expand operations. And then you get into people what we would call legacy mode, where they've done all of both of those things already. They've been in business. They're typically supporting large user bases, and we would refer to them as like a legacy. And so there's a lot of room in those various buckets for companies who really don't want to take on the additional load associated, both development load and the maintenance load associated with being more of an embedded payments or using an embedded payment solution. They want to just get in there, get the transaction set up, the transactional API set up, and then find a good partner to help them grow the payments part of their business. A lot of it has to do with typically size of company, amount of effort, where they are in that staging, right? Are they in growth mode? Are they in early mode? Like a startup, a lot of times it's this, what's the easiest thing for me to do to get going, right? Because I have to prove out the concept of the company. So there's still a lot of room left, I think, in the integrated space. We specifically see this in, like I said, companies either in that, like most of the time in that legacy mode, where they've built a pretty large user base, say a few hundred to 1,000 users. So they have good recurring revenue coming in to support what I would call a small business. But they don't really have a lot of expendable resources, right? A lot of those resources are used to maintain in the day-to-day business and work on the business, and not being able to really, build new things or add new functionality. And so the quickest way to market sometimes is to say, let me just do the transactional integration to the API, in other words, just the payment acceptance piece of it, and let a partner handle the rest. And then, maybe I grow into that piece and maybe I don't,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe that's enough for me because it supports my business, right? But we still see a lot of room, right? So it's valuable if, you can support both of those kinds of customers, because there's a lot of software companies out there, and they're all not, the biggest SaaS companies in the world, right? There's a lot of different kinds. So
Yeah, no, it's a great breakdown. Yeah, still some room for integrated payments here in today's space. So be rest assured, you don't truly have to go embedded if you don't have the resources or want to yet. But let's bring this to life here, Mark. You've worked on a large dental partner of Clearent on the PayFac as a service rollout that led to some pretty significant results. Just going through a couple here, increased processing volume per account by 1,900%, increased payment attachment rate by 27%, and reduced non-activated accounts by 11%. Some pretty significant numbers there. Can you walk us through how we got there with that dental partner?
Yeah, first let me premise it. Like it's obviously an unusual situation, but I think it makes a couple good points. So the large dental partner had been through a few iterations of payment integration, and they had settled on a PayFac as a service provider. Um, One of the things that they were struggling with was hardware deployment, as the PayFac as a service provider that they chose did not fully have an integrated methodology for ordering and fulfilling hardware from the boarding system. So, they didn't have a way to easily support getting hardware out in the field, and it really wasn't part of the overall strategy when they started the business. Right, they were taking payments via pay links and QR codes and sending people to pages, and so um, you know the software company themselves, the large dental partner, did see decent attachment rates. So they were getting somewhere, I think, in the high 60s attachment rates, almost 70 attachment rates. So good attachment rates. If they were selling 100 deals a month, they were getting 70 people to take on payments. But the volume of transaction was very low, right? Because in a dental environment, they were competing with several other payment acceptance systems. There was think of something like a Dentrix on the back end doing the adjudication. You could have everywhere in there selling text to pay. You could have a patient engagement system on the front end that was supporting, scheduling and reminders to customers. And all of those systems have the ability to accept payments. And so I think that was one of the biggest factors in, you know, how we positioned it. So the idea, what we did was add payment terminals to their system, and their system was primarily used by the front office people in the dental offices. So I almost think of it as like similar to line busting technology in a retail environment. You see this in Costco today and some other places where you're in line and the person comes out and they check, they basically check you out in line, right? And so if you think about it, you're kind of pushing that person to the front of the line. Um, because their technology was operated by the front office person, the idea was once we deployed hardware out there, we could change the game, right? We could make it so we could accept hardware at the front office, and it became part of the natural workflow. If you think about it, you walk into a dentist's office, the first person you might engage with is out there at the front office. On the way out, they might say, hey, can you settle up your bill? You say typically, well, can you put it on my insurance? They check the insurance and maybe it pays a few $100s of it and you still owe a few $100. So the natural thing would be to hand them a card. Historically, they might have went in the back and then put it through the adjudication system like Dentrix, or directed you to an online payment portal or something like that. But having the hardware right there associated with the scheduling system and the engagement system, they swiped the card. And so what happened was we moved from those accounts typically doing about $1,500 per month, which was really about 5 transactions, to over $30,000 a month. Today, that number is close to $40,000 a month, right? Because the payment flow just completely changed, right? And interestingly enough, it also affected attachment rates, right? And of course, it affected the reason it lowered the non-activated accounts rates, because more and more people, when they started figuring out there's hardware there, it changed the way people worked and operated, right? It forced a different movement or a different workflow in the organization. This kind of goes back to that the concept that I was talking about earlier, where you could call it contextual relevance, right? This idea of it makes more sense for you to hand the card to the person at the front office than the front office person to take that card and walk in the back office. It's a lot of stuff that that you don't often think about. We think about the technical aspects of it, or how am I going to do this faster, or I want to be able to dip it, or I want to pay on tap to pay, or something like that. Whereas sometimes it's not that difficult, right?
Yeah, it seems like and I mean, maybe we're minimizing it, but it does really seem like quite a simple change that drove such a huge impact, right? Like, not only increasing the usage of the payment solution within their software, but also then speeding up the time to that the time that payment is accepted, rather than going into the back office, sending it a week later via mail. You're collecting it on site, which is huge. So I think that's great. What do you think, Mark, is, maybe in a quick summary, like the biggest lesson that you could summarize from this success story?
Well, I think it's common sense. I think what it comes down to is sometimes the solution, you don't have to overthink it, right? Sometimes the solution is pretty basic. I think often we get in the payment space and we get into the technical weeds and we have all our acronyms and stuff. But if you really just think about movement and how somebody just put yourself in that position. You're standing there at the front desk and you just had your teeth worked on. Maybe you're not happy. A lot of us aren't. I'm not dentist friendly. I know a lot of people aren't dentist friendly. That I want to get out of there as quick as I can usually. So you hand them the card and I mean, you do sit. So you want that experience to happen right then and there. And it seems normal, right? It seems like it's in the normal workflow of how any kind of transaction happens with a card, right? You're in retail, you stand in front of a clerk and you hand them a card and you accept. In the grocery store, like it's the way that we pay, right? With the exception of self-service kiosks, it's the way that we interact. And so I think sometimes you have to just look at the common sense. Like let's change the workflow to make more sense. And you can see what it did for their business. Like it wasn't a big problem with attachment rates. It was the fact that the card disbursement was happening in other places, right? And it's not just this business. Like you could apply that to any business. Like here at Clearent or Xplor, we own several software companies, right? So I'm privy to know like how some of them operate, and so I look at something like Field Edge, which is one of our field service companies. And one of their biggest competitors is the accounting system, right? Why? Because a lot of customers or users of their system historically would allow the invoice to go all the way to accounting and then collect the card in accounting rather than collect the card on site when the technician is in the field, right? And so if you just think about those kinds of workflows and how do you improve them, sometimes it's just common sense. It's like just like it makes more sense. It makes it easier for all the things you just said, right, Steve? Like I get my money quicker. Like there's less risk associated with it, right? The customer's right there. It doesn't feel awkward. Like they normally are going to have their wallet with them or card or their phone where they can tap and pay on the way out the door, right? And so I think sometimes we just tend to overthink it in our business.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of shiny objects and acronyms and terminology out there. And again, that's the biggest reason we do this podcast is to break a lot of that down and really simplify it. So yeah, that was a great breakdown and summary there, Mark. Let's start to kind of wrap this up from a broad level of this episode. In any parting advice really for software providers that are evaluating an embedded versus an integrated model.
I think for me, it's keep it simple, right? I think as a company, you have to know yourself and just ask yourself the question, which path aligns best with our roadmap, our development resources and our customers' expectations, right? So, your company. If I'm a SaaS company, I know where I'm at. I know that I'm not selling 50 a month anymore. I'm selling 2 a month, but I have 1,000 customers I'm taking care of, and it's a really good living, and I don't want to lose it, right? Those things, right? You know where you're at, so just adjust your strategy to that. If you want that ultra smooth UX, and that's going to be part of it, and you're in growth mode as a SaaS partner, yeah, you should be investing the time and the resources into that embedded strategy. And if you want to go something quicker and you need, you want less moving parts that you have to manage, less expense, less development resources, then run that integrated model, right? I mean, either one of those, I think, work. It just depends on where you are in your life cycle and really what you can afford to expend in terms of development resources and really what your customer expectations are too, right? Every market's different. There's some places where these, the embedded systems are a lot more important than they are, where, the customer has like long development cycles and those kinds of things. It's, it becomes less important if they have a long cycle to implement a system. You think of like where Steve and I came from, we were selling into SAP and Oracle world. Those are pretty long cycles, right? To implement, they could be a year cycle. So it's not like you need to board the merchant instantly, right? So it's just things like that to think about.
Yeah, really great insights, Mark. That's really going to wrap it up here. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to share these insights with everybody. I will leave Mark's LinkedIn below if you want to go check out and connect with him there. He's also a really good cook, and he's got a lot of great LinkedIn posts coming out about his Italian background coming over on the LinkedIn. So go check it out. Beyond that as well, if you'd like to strategize with Clearent or really just have questions around your integrated or embedded payment strategy, also going to have a link in the description of this podcast as well. Get in touch with us and our payment consultants, and we'd be happy to walk you through any questions that you might have. With that being said, thank you for listening today, and we will see you next week.